All right, welcome back to the Sheep Farm Meet the Flockers production. And this is episode 2 from part 1 of Echoes of the Huxleys. The whole series is called Brave New World Order. One of the interesting things with this type of research are the doors that materialise in front of you. These doors I view as information opportunities. Once you open that door, sometimes it's an empty room and there's nothing there. Sometimes it's a treasure trove that takes you onto many, many other doors and journeys or journeys within journeys. And it's still intertwined, though, with your original starting point. That's what makes it so fascinating. And I wanted to include this research, although it's not directly about the Huxleys, it's sort of linked to the Huxleys, in this presentation for a number of reasons. Firstly, because there are several connections with the Huxleys. Secondly, it paints an important picture of the 60s construct. And thirdly, it continues the important work already achieved, initially by Dave McGowan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, and our mate Buck's trilogy of books, Mark Devlin, and his Musical Truth trilogy. And Mike Williams' Beatles research, and Crow 777's Crow and Jason's fantastic shows on similar subjects that they've just restarted, actually, and they've just recorded new ones. And this research, or our research here, our podcast here, picks up where they've left off and hopefully takes it in a slightly new direction, not a better direction, just a new direction for someone else then to come along and do the same with. That's what I'm saying about the doors opening doors. We've already mentioned the acid-fueled first and second Summers of Love in 1967 and the second being in 88 to 89, and both of them fueled with LSD and the second Summer of Love fueled with ecstasy. We also spoke about the Doors, talking of doors of opportunity, and the film by Oliver Stone released in 1992, reinserting Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception into the tangled minds of that generation, our Chris being one of them. Oliver Stone also directed the 1991 film JFK, which is also linked to Aldous Huxley. These are all examples of links or echoes back to the Huxleys via mind control and MK Ultra and eugenics and many other things, many other programs that have been used upon us for generations. With me today, as usual, is our Chris. How are you doing?
Good afternoon. All right, you're right.
Not too bad. So you've read through this next podcast. I mean, it's quite a long one, is this one? It's longer than the first one, actually. What were your thoughts, what the parts you've read?
Yeah, it's interesting. Surprising, a lot of it. I mean, the MK Ultra stuff is always fascinating, and we were just saying before we came on here, does everybody know about MK Ultra? Because we talk that much about stuff. You forget what people actually know about and don't know about.
Yeah.
I'm guessing most people have heard of it.
Most people listening probably have. You go into Middle England, if I went round my neighbours here, probably less of them would talk to me. Because I think if you mention, MK Ultra or mind control, they'd look at you. Even if, again, you take them to the concentration camp. Even if you showed them the church committee Senate meetings and all that type of stuff, and the evidence behind it all.
It's actually documented truth now. It's not a conspiracy, is it? It's an actual truth. But it's like I was saying to you, if I ask people about eugenics, a lot of people haven't heard of it. You just presume they have, but they haven't. And that's not saying that we're any cleverer than anyone else or anything, but it's just a subject that's not discussed, is it?
No, I mean, people like us.
Eugenics, yeah, us nut jobs talk about it all the time. But is it in the normal world? I suppose it's to make a sound.
Well, it is in the normal world as soon as I turn the TV on. But they're 4K Ultra TV.
It wasn't the 4K Ultra TV, as we've pointed out numerous times.
Which is MK Ultra TV.
Yeah, 4's an M. It has to be, doesn't it? It has to be. That has to be what it is. What else? What other reason would you have to call it 4K Ultra TV?
I don't know. Yeah, but there are a lot of links. One thing I would say is that, and I think this might show that some of the things that we think are organic, we mentioned this in the first one, and I'm sure a lot of people can see this who are listening, and some people, maybe they've just come over to this side of the divide, if you like. This will put, in a nutshell, the links back, even the organic things that we think are organic and organic. And what this research has done for me over this last 12 months is it's made me realise how endemic, how ingrained MK Ultra and eugenics are. We knew they were ingrained, and the technologies that they're using, but this has just documented that these things are the thread running through everything. You can just see it, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And from this Huxley research, I've come to the conclusion, Chris, that all mental illness is based on or comes from MK Ultra type mind control operations that are still running alongside eugenics programs. Because if you think about when we were young, none of our parents or our friends or any of us relations, to my knowledge, apart from one lady, I remember one of my dad's mates' wives, she had agoraphobia. She was the only one that I remember had any sort of mental illness that you'd think. Certainly autism wasn't there. Certainly any of those type of things. We never heard of that type of thing, did we? They weren't on the radar, is what I'm trying to say.
No. We've had MK Ultra, haven't we? En masse through TV and pharmaceuticals and numerous other things. So all this stuff that you're going to talk about has been done, but just en masse, rather than to individuals.
Yeah, which is even more eerie. So, speaking of Doors, the band The Doors, who were one of the movers and shakers in the 60s, constructed anti-establishment, drugged-out generation. Jim Morrison is linked to Huxley, or the Huxleys, in a few different ways. One was the fact that his band, The Doors, was named after Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, which was itself a reference to a quote by the 18th century English artist and poet William Blake. The Doors of Perception was originally a metaphor written by Blake in his 1790 book, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The metaphor was used to represent Blake's feelings about mankind's limited perception of the reality around them. He said, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as if it is infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. And these were written in, there you go, a 1790 book. Interestingly, Blake is sometimes considered as one of the forerunners to the 60s free love movement, and he advocated the removal of all state restrictions on sexual activity such as homosexuality, prostitution, adultery, culminating in the birth control movement of the early 20th century, or the mid-20th century, via eugenic sterilisation, which we've seen and watched these eugenics programs that were carried out in America mainly, a lot of the times, and then in Nazi Germany, where they were sterilising people who were unfit to have children. And the pill, at the start of the 60s, hippie revolution and free love. It's done subtly, innit, Chris? Mind control. It's done very subtly. They called it free love. Here's a pill. Here's a drug, you enjoy it more.
Now you think about it, what does that pill do to people?
Well, it alters the hormones for a start.
Some people have some bad reactions to it, don't they? But people are just popping them and not really thinking of any long-term. I mean, does it have a long-term effect on you, on the lady taking it, or the child when they do eventually decide to conceive?
Well, who knows? I mean, we've spoken about HRT. Yeah, that's been dragged backwards and backwards. I would say 100 years ago, ladies might have gone through the change when they were 70 or 80, possibly. And then it would drag back, and it normalised now in the 40s. And the common denominator is that most women take the pill. I'm not saying it's just that thing, because there's obviously stuff in water and things like that, but it's certainly one of those things to look at. And also, by altering your hormones, it alters your mentality, doesn't it? Which comes back to another way of controlling people. The Doors of Perception is an autobiographical book written by Aldous Huxley, published in 1954. It elaborates on his psychedelic experience under the influence of mescaline that is derived from a certain cactus. Huxley recalls the insights he experienced ranging from purely aesthetic to sacramental visions and reflects on their philosophical and psychological implications. Others who have tried mescaline are Jerry Garcia, vocalist with rock band Grateful Dead. Crow keeps going on about them. Colin said the people who followed them were called Deadheads.
Mm.
Allen Ginsberg, an American poet and writer. Jim Carroll, American author, poet, autobiographer, and punk musician, best known for his autobiographical work, The Basketball Diaries. Hunter S. Thompson, which he'll pop up in this presentation as well, again, ironically. Best known for Fear and Loathing in Vegas, Las Vegas. Comedian George Carlin and Philip K. Dick, American science fiction writer. And Carlos Santana, a guitarist, who was also part of the LA 60s set. Now, I haven't done really much background on these people. I'm not saying they're involved in anything. What we are saying is that this drug was introduced from nowhere and given to these people, and it became trendy. And we've got to say, most things that become trendy are some kind of control, aren't they?
Mm. Is mescaline still around now then?
Well, it's a mushroom, isn't it? So mescaline's
mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So
derivative of magic mushrooms, basically.
Yes.
Right.
And they were using it as part of remember in the first one, they were using it as part of, in episode 1, as part of the MK Ultra stuff.
Mm.
Gottlieb were using it.
Right. So it's virtually a natural LSD, I suppose, then.
Yeah. Well, all of these things are natural, aren't they? They're just what they take out as the active part to make it into a specific drug. So instead of eating the entire mushroom, they'll take the bit out that makes you hallucinate and utilize that. So it's like a condensed version.
It's still synthetic, though, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Mm. In October 1955, Huxley had an experience while on mescaline that he considered more profound than those detailed in Doors of Perception. He decided his previous experiments, the ones detailed in Doors of Perception and his other book, Heaven and Hell, that's got to come from that poet as well, William Blake, because that's where he wrote Heaven and Hell, had been temptations to escape from the central reality into false or at least imperfect and partial nirvanas of beauty and mere knowledge. These are the spells that went on to influence the public. What he's saying there is, by taking a drug, it takes you out of reality into a false reality that you think's real, into a nirvana. And that is what we've had done to us, probably since the 60s, where we've been given that dream of materialism. People have been, however we call it, drugged, whether you're drinking water or Coca-Cola or taking pharmaceuticals or watching TV and it's altering your brain. We're being drugged. Mm. Some more than others, some more susceptible than others.
Well, also, just quickly, if I look at the past 3 years nonsense, how we were drugged by foreign holidays, traveling, being able to go anywhere we want. And then as soon as that's taken away, we can be
manipulated,
talked into doing other things, manipulated.
Yeah, that you wouldn't want to do normally.
No, is that a drug? I mean, you're addicted to it, and it's kind of an addiction, not a drug.
Well, it's an addiction because most material items aren't. I mean, you can't say food's an addiction unless you're addicted to eating too much of it. It's a necessity, isn't it? But things outside that, any necessity like breathing, going to the toilet, that type of thing, are material, aren't they? They're not necessary for your life. They've been inserted into your life to seem important. So we'll come to the Doors and Jim Morrison. And looking back, Jim Morrison had everything to become that 60s music icon. The right looks, the right songs, the right sound, and the right required military background. He was a film student at UCLA also, and we'll come on to that in a bit. He also had the right bloodline, which we're going to go into in deep detail towards the end of this presentation. Incidentally, the Doors members were keyboardist Ray Manzarek Jr., guitarist Robert Krieger, and drummer John Densmore. Regarding the before-mentioned Twilight Language that we mentioned in episode 1, if you remember, Twilight Language came from Hinduism and Buddhism, and possibly of its usage in popular culture as a kind of subliminal, hypnotic, weaponized messaging program. Which probably comes back to us 4K Ultra TV, Chris, because if they've recognised frequencies that work, that can send people into some sort of trance, they're basically doing mass MK Ultra experimentation using LSD and these frequencies from this music, this Twilight Language.
I would hazard a guess, yes. I mean, I think I brought this up the other day, but if you look at a white wall in your room with a TV on, and you see the pulsing beats, that to me looks like, hypnotic. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Yeah, it's like a flicker room, like a
flicker rate. Yeah,
flicker rates. If you turn the lights off and watch the white light, if you like.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, bouncing off the wall. And there's a reason that these 4K Ultra TVs have become so cheap. Because they want everyone to have one in their house, especially now. I mean, is it a coincidence they've got so cheap in the last 3 years?
No. I mean, now you can buy
16-inch ones.
How much
300
for?
quid for that, so 300 quid. 2 to 300 quid you can get them for. Yeah. You can still pay top coin for them, but you can get them cheap.
Yeah, and people are going to buy them, aren't they? They're wired into internet straight away, beaming out Wi-Fi.
I mean, I've got one. Everyone's got a TV. Well, not everybody, obviously, but it's just a matter of how much you let it influence you, I suppose.
Yeah,
the main point of it, isn't it?
I suppose it's what you're watching on it. I mean, the flicker rate's always going to get you whether you like it or not, but it's what you're watching on it. Yeah. Before we get into the doors, and I want to talk about MK Ultra again. The impact this mind control program had worldwide in the 60s and the future generations can never really be underplayed. In episode 1, we mentioned, and I've just mentioned him, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, leader of the MK Ultra operation for the CIA. One of the people that Gottlieb employed was a Scottish guy called Dr. Ewan Cameron. He was a Scottish-born psychiatrist known today for his role in the unethical medical experiments and development of psychological and medical torture techniques for the CIA. This guy's a doctor, Chris. This guy's a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, 24, that TV show said that torture was all right, but it's nothing other than evil, is it, really?
Yeah, Jack Bauer.
That's it. I never watched it, but yeah.
Kiefer Sutherland.
They kind of they put the fact that torture was all right into people's heads, didn't they? It was all right if you were after certain results. It was all right. And funnily enough, then Guantanamo
if you were good guys,
and it was all right. Yeah, it's all right. It's all right to strap someone down and torture them. It's fine, as long as you're getting right answers.
Yeah, well, I mean, en masse, you can see where this goes. He served, right? Cameron served. I'll give you a bit of his background. He was president of the American Psychiatric Association. He was president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association. He was president of the American Psychopathological Association. He was president of the Society of Biological Psychiatry. And he was president of the World Psychiatric Association. This is the power this guy wielded. And he's running an MK Ultra operation for mind control torture techniques. Oh, sorry, medical torture techniques. Medical and torture shouldn't be in the same sentence, should it?
Well, that just drums up that vision, doesn't it, of that guy unrolling his torture tools in a little cloth roll, if you like.
Yeah. Which one shall I use? Yeah. Which one shall I use?
Yeah. Which we've seen in numerous movies over the years.
Yeah. In 1940, it's not. Sorry, I'll just rewind. It's not that much different from putting somebody at rack medieval times, is it?
No, it's just more advanced, more technology involved, I suppose. Yeah.
In 1945, Dr. Cameron was invited to the Nuremberg trials for a psychiatric evaluation of Rudolf Hess.
Right, definitely a guy you get in for that.
Yeah. I hadn't looked into whether he's related to David Cameron, because he was from Scotland as well. That'd be interesting. This sounds similar to Joly West's interrogation to Jack Ruby Slippers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Remember in the first one where he went in and 45 minutes later is pissing in his own hand and drinking it. Yeah.
Well, also you get a guy in who we've given all these basically accolades to, awards, society of whatever.
Yeah.
All this stuff. So he's paid, isn't he? He's working for CIA. He's fully bought off, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Well, he's a Scottish guy working for CIA.
Get him involved in Nuremberg trials. But then we can steer Nuremberg trials whichever direction we want to.
Yeah. And he's a Scottish guy working for CIA in Canada. So who's he working for, really? I mean, this is like a Tavistock operation, a British operation, mind control, working with the Americans, you know. Since when does a Scottish guy work for CIA openly, doing mind control, torture experiments? So before his arrival at Nuremberg, Cameron had written, this is why we're good to interview Rudolf Hess, Cameron had written The Social Reorganisation of Germany, in which he argued that German culture and its individual citizens would have to be transformed and reorganised. The paper stated that German culture and its people would have offspring bound to become a threat to world peace in 30 years. We've heard stuff like this before. To prevent this, the West would have to take measures to reorganise German society. Dr. Cameron's psychic driving experiments consisted of putting a subject into a drug-induced coma for weeks at a time, up to 3 months in one case, while playing tape loops of noise or simple statements. So there's 2 points there. One, this guy's head of psychiatry of numerous organisations, and he's going to says the West should take measures to reorganise Germany. Then he's sent out to Nuremberg to question one of the German leaders while he's on trial. Right? Nobody see any problems with that? Next thing, he's coming up with techniques called psychic driving, right? And he can put people in comas legally and not be ever prosecuted for it. And he's prosecuting Nazis who apparently were terrorising people, right? And yet he can do that and call them the bad guys, which I'm not saying they weren't, but he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Putting people into comas for 3 months at a time.
I never actually dawned on me that he put hypocrisy of everything.
Just, it's on steroids.
He's coming up with Nuremberg law that you're not allowed to medically, not allowed to interfere with anyone medically without their permission. Yeah. But then he's doing it. And then he's in charge of it.
It's insane. Yeah, it's insane.
And it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be. I mean, imagine he's in a coma, right? Or they're in comas, and they're playing tape loops of noises and simple statements. Just simple statements, Chris. They're not swearing.
Well, again, on mass, they did that at Guantanamo Bay, didn't they? They were blaring out all kinds of stupid music.
But what were they blaring out, Chris? You just said the word there. Music.
What was it?
Music.
Yeah, well, it was like children's music and stuff, wasn't it?
It doesn't matter what the music is, does it? It's music.
Yeah.
And the 60s generation.
So you would hazard a guess his experiments led to that point, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And so then we in the pop culture began late 50s, but bang in the 60s when it exploded and mesmerised everybody and hypnotised everybody, even people that weren't taking LSD. All had the favourite band and sung their favourite songs. So MK Ultra experimentation was undertaken at the Institute between 1957 and 1964, you're right. In addition to LSD, he experimented with various paralytic drugs, such as Curare, which is a common name for various alkaloids used in arrow poisons originating from Colombia, I do believe, from plant extracts. So it's basically paralysing people.
Don't worry, we're the good guys.
We're the good guys. It's the Nazis that are the bad guys.
Yeah,
you know,
put them on trial.
Yeah, we're just being bad, so we're protecting you.
Yeah, we're being bad so we can use it on Nazis.
Yeah. We've got to change and reorganise. Cameron also used electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times normal power.
Well,
aren't messing about, these people.
There shouldn't be a normal power, should there, for a
Normal
electric?
power, no, it's 10 times. It's just 10 times more. Jerry, I
normal
love this
level
guy.
of the normal level of electrocution is, but we need to do it 40 times more.
Yeah. The Montreal experiments were a series of experiments initially aimed to treat schizophrenia by changing memories and erasing the patient's thoughts. So that's what they're setting out to do. That's lobotomization, isn't it? During the 50s and 60s, Cameron became involved in the MKUltra mind control program. His work eventually led to the publication of QBARK, spelled K-U-B-R-A-R-K. So QBARK Counterintelligence Interrogation Manual. So all his work that he did, he came up with that. That's what came out of it, the other end.
So somewhere there's a book on torture, a torture manual.
Yes. I think there's 2 now. They've moved on. There's part 2, I think.
All right.
And there's probably a sequel. And these are the ones they're telling you about.
Yeah.
And it describes the use of abusive techniques like the use of electric shock, as I mentioned, in addition to the use of threats and fear and sensory deprivation and isolation. Where we heard
Threats,
that before?
Fear and isolation. Weird.
That'll never happen on a world basis. So what I'm trying to get to, that work in the 1950s, 60s, that can be used en masse, we saw happen in March 2020.
Well, you could also say was Guantanamo Bay another experiment for that was taking it en masse before it became en masse. You know what I mean? That was like we've done it individually. Now let's do it in this camp where no one's allowed to look in and see what's actually going on, where they've got all these poor guys and gals. Yeah, we've got no chance of it. I mean that in itself is horrendous, isn't it? Is it still there, that bloody place?
Oh yeah. Well, it's on Cuba. Do you know America's Enemy? And it's been on Cuba. It's been on Cuba for 100 years. But they were their enemy. So all the way through Cuban missile crisis, American Navy had a base on Cuba.
Little jail there.
They had a base on jail. You would do, wouldn't you, with your enemy? They just allow it. Yeah. Yeah. So MKUltra was intended to develop procedures to identify drugs that could be used in interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions. I will take that. I will take that. Through brainwashing and psychological torture.
Psychological torture.
Yeah. MKUltra began in 1953 and was altered in 1973. Of course it was. It used numerous methods to manipulate its subject's mental states and brain functions, such as covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD, and other chemicals without the subject's consent. And also it used electroshocks, not just electroshocks, but hypnosis, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. So MKUltra was preceded by 2 other drug-related experiments, Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke. It was organised through the CIA's Office of Strategic Intelligence and coordinated with the United States Army and Biological Welfare Laboratories. So the goal of Artichoke was to determine whether a person could involuntarily or involuntarily be made to perform an act like an attempted assassination. So this is where... So MKUltra is a spin-off from the Manchurian Candidates. The project also studied the effect of not just hypnosis, but forced addiction, what we were talking about at the beginning, and subsequent withdrawal from morphine and other chemicals to produce amnesia and other vulnerable states in subjects. Artichoke researched the potential of dengue fever and other diseases. A classified Artichoke memo read, "Not all viruses have to be lethal. The object includes those that act as short-term and long-term incapacitating agents. The term incapacitating agent is defined by the United States Department of Defense as an agent that produces temporary psychological or mental effects, or both, which will render individuals incapable of concerted effort in the performance of their assigned duties. It describes an agent which renders a person unable to harm themselves or others, regardless of consciousness. This is what our governments are doing with our tax money. This is it. Dr. Cameron's work was funded by an subgroup called MK Ultra Subproject 68. And he was the co-founder and director, not just the president of all those psychiatric associations, between 1957 and 1964 of the Allen Memorial Institute, known as the Allen. It's situated on the slope of Mount Royal on the McGill University campus. On a side note, if you remember from our Trudeau podcast, Margaret Trudeau, the former wife of Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, had a mental breakdown as a result of whatever was going on in Ottawa during her marriage to Pierre Trudeau. The reason, apparently, according to Cathy O'Brien, was that she came home early to find a full-blown sex party taking place at their home. She was put under the control and care of psychiatrist named Dr. Dimitri Pivnicki of the Montreal Allen Memorial Institute, which is or was part of the McGill University. Pivnicki was trained by Dr. Ewan Cameron, or Donald Cameron. More notable people went to McGill University. There were 12 Nobel laureates, 145 Rhodes Scholars, 5 astronauts, the Governor-General of Canada, 15 Justices of Canadian Supreme Court, at least 8 foreign leaders, over a dozen members of the Canadian Parliament, the United States Congress, British Parliament, and 10 billionaires, 6 Academy Award winners, 3 Grammy Award winners, 4 Pulitzer Prize winners, 2 Presidential Medals of Freedom recipients, and 5 Emmy Award winners. William Shatner was one of these notable people who went to McGill University, and Shatner was part of the constructed invention of modern space and science fiction on TV into millions of minds. The Montreal experiment goals were to induce lifelong changes in humans. Pierre Trudeau went there, and so did his son Justin Trudeau as well. You have to ask yourself, Chris, don't you? Well, can we see these influences playing out in front of us?
I mean, it's becoming more and more relevant, even when I read it through the first time, that this is leading up to now, I would say.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, they've done it since then, but I mean, now is literally all this research and all these experiments literally going to the last 3 years, don't they?
Yes.
Funny as well that Trudeau's missus went mad as well, like BJ's missus, the mum. What's with all these women going mad? You know.
Yeah. But then that's passed down to the children as well, isn't it? They're seeing that traumatic behaviour. The mum going, but all these people going to these universities, let's just say they know that they can spread this, we'll call it Twilight Language for want of a better word, this spell around. And so clever people go to university and they know if they pump this frequency through there, they're going to catch all these people that go on to become leaders or whatever influential people that they've now mind-controlled without their knowledge, which is what they've said they're doing. Mind-controlled without their knowledge, these people, the information that they need to gather to go and turn out to a generation later, a Justin Trudeau, who's, like Blair, just a raging psychopath.
All them judges as well. Was it 15 judges in there?
Yeah, 15 judges.
It just occurred to me, imagine the influence if you've got 15 judges in your pocket.
Yeah. Well, again, it's like that. We've mentioned this before, but that school that you looked at, I forget which one it was now, that one that Chris Whitty went to, and all them generals were there. Yeah. And let's just say you're in trenches in 1915 or whatever, and that one general 2 miles back has made a decision to go over the top at 6 o'clock in the morning. And sat in that trench, that either you, your mates, one out of 2 years going to be injured, and 1 out of 8 years going to be dead, or whatever it is, what the figures were. Yeah.
I think you were more than that.
Whatever it is, right? And he just says, no, you're doing it. And that one person can wipe out 50,000 people on a morning by that decision.
Also, like you said, 5 astronauts in there. And now, I would have
and William Shatner.
To be an astronaut. William Shatner. To be an astronaut, you've got to be a liar.
Yeah. Or brainwashed or mind controlled
Or
and not know you're a
brainwashed
liar.
to believe.
Yeah.
To,
Mm.
mm,
The astronaut. I mean, William Shatner in there is a good one because he's still pumping that information out. We're going on the Amazon giant dildo.
yeah. Nobody cried to say it was real fine. Never mind that he's an actor. He cried when he landed and said it was amazing.
Right.
Even though he only just went really high in the sky.
Yeah, just a bit higher than a plane does. I'm now convinced, and will state as a matter of opinion, that worldwide mental illness is MK Ultra. I don't think you need any more evidence to say that this has been a planned out and orchestrated event to cause people to go insane. Just look at this, right? If you think about it, there was someone on Breakfast TV the other day where this guy were on saying he identified as a wolf, right?
Not wrong with that.
Not wrong with that. 20 years
I used
ago,
to think I'm a wolf, but I'm all right now.
20 years ago, he would have been treated for some kind of mental illness. Now you can't even question it. That's where we've got to.
But also, why is it on TV? Why is it on the news?
Yes. Why is it on the 4K MK Ultra TV?
Is that real? Is that news? If I said I now identify as a dog, would I be on the news? So that's another reason that it's 4K Ultra, MK Ultra TV, because somebody's put it there to do something to you.
Yes.
Whether it's to normalise it or cause a reaction in your brain, I don't know.
Examples of modern day MK Ultra here in the UK, around the world, I suppose, are the Nudge Unit, now known as the Behavioural Insights Team, or BIT, or BIT. And it uses the same social engineering techniques as we've just heard Dr. Ewan Cameron, but Ewan Cameron's work on MK Ultra and Gottlieb and all these other people, but without the drugs. It uses psychology, behavioural economics. I mean, what are these words? Why do we need behavioural economics? Just as we saw in 2020 around the world, in one swoop, March, close everything down. Everything stopped. Everything. The BIT is a worldwide business. In December 2021, the group became only owned by a charity called Nesta. What could go wrong? Nesta was conceived in part thanks to the vision of Oscar-winning director Baron David Putnam. Putnam produced films for Sir Ridley Scott and Ken Russell, who we mentioned in the first one, who did Devils, which was written by Aldous Huxley.
And I would hazard a guess, I know I've talked about this before, but I think Ridley Scott's chief player in the
Machine.
Yeah, definitely. He makes films with a lot of programming in them. As did Ken Russell, as we talked about.
Yeah. And I think they're put in these positions, Chris, and allowed up the ladder, and I wouldn't say told as much as given things to make, because they only make films that they can get funding for. So if they can't get funding for it because that's not the narrative they want out, then they'll put a film there that they know is going to get the narrative out.
Or maybe if you put that bit of narrative in there, then we will give you that.
Exactly, yeah. Like the global climate warming change. Right, we put this, making this film, it's got global climate warming changing and trannies. Right.
There's your briefcase
Guaranteed.
full of cash.
There's your briefcase full of cash. Yeah. Anyway, Nesta it's known as the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. So why would they need a behavioural insights team working for that? Bear in mind, Baron David Putnam, Sir Ridley Scott, Ken Russell, they make films or made films. They are in control of TV sets, pumping this stuff out. And it's an innovation foundation, Chris, in the UK. Putnam was also chairman and CEO of Columbia Pictures. So there you go. He was also a UNICEF ambassador. In 2021, Nesta announced a 10-year strategy that would be focused on 3 major areas: childhood inequality, public health, and a a sustainable economy. All this from a National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. Nesta owns the Nudge Unit, the Behavioural Insights team. Why would this arts charity, if you like, need to own a that Behavioural Insights team other than from a propaganda or programming perspective? This is how it works. That's how it works. We put that guy in control of that. Them producers and directors in control of that. It all looks lovely on the outside. We get an actor to smile at the camera and talk about how fantastic this charity is. But in reality, behind the scenes, they're just MK Ultra-ing you. The fact that most of us in the world, I'm saying the most of us, I'm not, and Chris isn't, but most of us in the world are on repeat prescriptions of medications. These might not be pharmaceutical. They could be BBC One, BBC Two, or ITV medicated prescriptions of TV, 4K Ultra.
Well, EastEnders prescribed to me twice a week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you must watch EastEnders. Or they inhale, or drink, or eat toxins, or they're sprayed from skies, or in the water, eat via GMO foods, etc. It doesn't matter. It's a weaponized delivery system, stroke device. Same as the LSD operations were done in MK Ultra. We've seen it on the people on the doorsteps banging pots and pans. The mass psychosis. You know what I mean? We've seen it buying toilet roll, things like this. This is that. This is that, innit? This is that. Yeah. This is exactly what Huxley wrote about and what Orwell wrote about. And Huxley said, "And we're going to enjoy a servitude." Again,
we need to enjoy it, otherwise we'll stand up, won't we?
Yeah, well, people probably won't have any choice to enjoy the servitude because they won't know any different. They won't even think it's servitude. A slave who thinks they're free is the best slave, isn't it?
Mm.
Dr. Ewan, this is an interesting part of this, and this is the bit that freaked me out a little bit, and I'm sure it did you when you read through it. Dr. Cameron wanted to extend the concept of contagion to chronic anxiety. Imagine mental illness as a social contagion. Imagine that. That is what we've got. We've got that.
Well, they did it. They did it, didn't they, Fatty, with the whole discussion about mental illness.
Yes.
You've gone from, I suppose, people saying they weren't feeling too good mentally or they're having anxiety, to people now talk about my mental health, and they say it about themselves. Whereas it used to be, someone would say that guy's losing it or whatever. People are self-subscribing themselves with mental health problems.
Yeah. Or they say, I'm on the spectrum, or...
Yeah, exactly. But it's become... and they didn't make it like... To say I'm on the spectrum would be like an insult to yourself. It was made as like a...
badge of honour. And,
yeah, kind of a badge of honour.
And I think this is not ridiculing anybody who's got mental issues, by the way.
No, not at all. And we all go through bad times and good times.
Yeah, I certainly
what they want to do is...
Yeah, with Lyme disease, yeah.
You don't want to have any bad times. You're not allowed to have any bad times. It's because we can medicate it.
Yeah,
you don't have to have
exactly.
Any emotion.
Yeah. What we're saying is that these bad times, these mental illness intrusions in his lives are inserted. It's part of an operation.
Yeah, that's the difference. When we all have bereavements and deaths and, lose a job or split with a spouse or whatever, but this is different, isn't it? Because the trauma now being delivered to humanity is done on purpose.
Yes.
It's manufactured. It's not real.
No, it's not organic.
It can be real, but it's not an issue that would affect you as a human being unless it was forced on you by the telebox.
Yeah. But so this is what they were researching in, I'll say the 50s and 60s and onwards, but it was before that. But social mental contagion. So you imagine that just the ability for people with mental illness to transmit their diseases to others.
Yeah, those three words shouldn't be together, should they?
No.
Social mental contagion.
Like I said, this is what they're working with. They're working in researching in the 50s and 60s and onwards. The word transmit means to transmit is to broadcast out electrical waves or signals or radio or television programs. Look at what they're saying to us. This is what it means. E.g., the programme was transmitted on the 7th of October, or the 22nd of November, if we want to be right on what we're talking about, or March 2020. The programme was transmitted on March 2020. That adds a different meaning to that, doesn't it? It also means to cause something to pass from one person or place to another. So these are the real meanings of these words, and this is what they're working towards. We're surrounded. This is electrical talk and comms talk. How we're involved in comms. This is how they build these transmitters. This is what they do. They're using electrical frequencies and communication technologies. We're surrounded by antenna and transmitters. We're walking antennas and transmitters. Cameron warned the governments and institutions that they should take measures against such potential liabilities. Now, that word there is doublespeak, because when they're saying stuff like that, they should take measures against such potential liabilities. That means we're going to do it first. That means we need to work on this because somebody else is going to get there before us. Hence why they put the shoulder behind it, and they had all these people like Cameron, Joly West, and all these other people that Gottlieb had set on to do all this experimental work. So I'll just want to remind, Cameron argued that people with mental illnesses could spread and transmit their mental diseases and possibly other illnesses. Who does this sound like, Chris? Professor Giordano pushing his...
Yeah.
I'll turn everybody into hypochondriacs.
Make a few people ill. Everyone else will turn into hypochondriacs.
Yes. Make a few people ill.
Virus to spread on it. Yeah.
Imagine if this could be achieved via music, TV, film, and even the written word. Were they tapping into Twilight Language frequencies or spells, whatever we want to call them, hidden subliminal messaging that could turn something on? Because as we know, Chris, we've done research and we've looked at stuff and we spoke to other people, and this type of trauma can be passed down to generations, to people's children. I've
always thought that, yeah.
Can it be brought out? So these people watch this stuff over and over and over again, and they put the VR headset on as well.
Not only passed down though, Fatty, then the next generation of politicians and leaders, or whatever, they then use that as well to make it worse instead of better. What I mean is, if you got some say genetic trauma, it could probably be cured, couldn't it? Or it could be eased, should we say? But if someone wants it to be worse, and then you've traumatized a generation and a generation, it's just going to get worse and worse, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And then I was just thinking when you read that bit was, if you go into Waterstones, for example, bookshop, I'm guessing most of the books that surround you in your house and surround me in my bookshelf here, you can't buy in Waterstones.
No.
So you walk into Waterstones. Waterstones is, I'm using that as an example, but a bookshop like that, you can't. Well, it could be that we're nuts and we buy crazy books. There could be that, so they don't want them in high street shops. But if you go into a high street bookshop, you'll pick up the same books in every shop, but you won't get the obscure ones. What I'm saying is, the ones that are there are the ones they want you to read.
Yes, just like the TV programs. They're the ones that want it. I went to the clinic and they had Sky News on, and all it had were train crash, this, that, this, missing baby, blah blah, and that's what they're pumping out. And it was strange because I'd not seen the news. I can't remember the last time I watched the news live. I can't remember. And
I used to watch it and then I threw
out
the nonsense, but I can't stomach it now.
No, I can't stomach listening to the people on it. The frequency of the voices turns me off. I can't stand the information.
Do you remember, even before the nonsense and through the nonsense, you used to be able to predict what was coming next. You could predict what was going to be in the news the next day because you could see the build-up.
Yeah.
I could anyway. I could see the build-up of what they were discussing in the morning, and then they'd have a solution by the evening or the next day.
Yeah, it's so transparent.
So blatant, so transparent.
But maybe the downside to these frequencies, Chris, and the downside to like the 80s and 90s Second Summer of Love was, it froze people. The the drug culture for most people, but maybe some people it did the opposite to. Like we said about the internet, some of these things have the opposite effect that they can't control. Or maybe they do. Maybe they think they control it because they know it's going to happen. But, the information that we got from the internet, for instance,
An example is they released the internet, right? A large amount of people start watching cat videos. A large amount of people, go off and watch people dancing or whatever. Then a minority of people go and look into things a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
That interest them. I'm not just saying what we talk about, but it could be
anything.
Ghosts. It could be all kind of,
Yeah.
But some people maybe find out things that to better themselves. Let them put it like that. To better themselves mentally, or is it just to entertain yourself? Or is it a bit of both? Or I don't know.
Well, I mean, entertainment. I mean, we're not the first ones to say this, but enter the mind. So it's. I don't look at this as entertaining me. I look at it as learning. People who watch cat videos, it's entertaining.
I've watched a few cat videos with my daughter, to be fair.
Yeah,
some of them
that's different.
Funny.
She's allowed to because she's a kid.
Yeah.
Kids do stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I want to go into some of the Indian music that was around in the 60s. And I found this fascinating when I was doing this research. Like most of the research, you don't realise what you're going to uncover. And I got into this quite by accident as well. Back to the 60s and the use of Indian music and gurus, and some of these gurus, as we shall see, have their links to elite families and the British ruling government, the colonial government. The Kinnara School of Music, Kinnara spelled Kinnara, so if I pronounced that wrong, I apologise, was a music school founded in Bombay, India in 1962 by Indian classical musician Ravi Shankar. With his increased popularity and influence in the West, Shankar opened a second branch of the Kinnara School of Music in Los Angeles in May 1967, right on time for the LSD weed-fueled hippie summer of love and the constructed peace movements. What have we seen in the 60s, or since the 60s? Mass depressions, suicides, publicised by superstars of the day that everybody looks up to, like Nirvana's Kurt Cobain. I mean, Nirvana's also Hindu-Indian meaning, isn't it? It seems to me via... Heaven. Is it, the perfect state or a state. And there we've got him with his smiley face, with his dented skull. Yeah, with a dint at the side of his head.
Crossed eyes and his tongue hanging out.
Yeah. I mean, again, is it so obvious?
Is that even that's a subliminal in itself, isn't it? You've got a suicide dead, and the word above it is Nirvana.
Yeah.
You will find heaven and peace if you just shoot top your head off.
Yeah. And what was the first song? Teenage Spirit or something?
I don't know. I can't say.
Or something like that, wasn't it? Smell of Teenage Spirit or something like that. I mean, yeah. It seems to me via this research that things like mental illness, like I've said before, are possibly passed via Twilight Language we spoke about in episode 1, via the experiments carried out by the lunatics like Dr. Ewan Cameron. Ravi Shankar's concept for Kinnara was to further the strict Guru Shishna tradition in Indian origin religions. The human potential movement arose out of the counterculture of the 1960s and formed around the concept of an extraordinary potential that it advocates believed to lie largely untapped in all people. This goes again to some kind of program running. When you read it like that lies untapped in all people. They're trying to look for something out there. It's a eugenics program. If you had a eugenicist saying that, you go, "Oh right, yeah, that makes sense," wouldn't you? LSD and rock music were the keys to unlock this untapped potential, probably for control. The movement takes as its premise the belief that through the development of their human potential, people can experience a life of happiness, creativity, and fulfillment, and that such people will direct their actions within society towards assisting others to release their potential. They believe that the collective effort of individuals cultivating their own potential will be positive change in society at large. For whom, I ask, is this positive change, Chris? Does that sound a bit like Dr. Ewan Campbell's thing he wanted Germans to become when he went to Nuremberg? We've got to reorganise them. But yet the opposite has happened, as we've just been talking about, because that was the plan. To soften up the population of the world using drugs and subliminal messaging, making us more susceptible to their eugenics programs. It is now known, like we said before, that we pass on the trauma via DNA to our offspring. Is this the same for all these experiments? Like the human potential movement. It was regarded as, by some as being related to the psychedelic culture, such as hippies and the Summer of Love, which we now know was a huge psyop. And here we go. George Harris. Go on.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, just thinking about what you were saying there, it could even be said that maybe they softened us up in 80s and 90s fine.
I'm sure
ready
they did.
And maybe 2000s, well, 80s, 90s more so. Maybe ready, and if you genetically take trauma down, maybe it's softening up our kids. So that when they do traumatise them, they'll be more traumatised.
Bit by bit.
I mean, we always moan about the snowflakes and all that lot.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the idea. Soften us all up, ready for the Chuck Norris roundhouse, as we say.
Yeah. Well, when I said then, bit by bit. Yeah. When I said bit by bit then, that's your behavioural insights team, isn't it? BIT. Bit by bit. Yeah. So George Harrison's adoption of Hindu philosophy as an Indian instrumentation in his songs with the Beatles in the mid-60s, together with the band's highly publicised study of transcendental meditation, truly kick-started the human potential movement. The HPM, human potential movement, has much in common with humanistic psychology in that Abraham Maslow's theory of self-actualization strongly influenced its development. So I haven't done a lot on Abraham Maslow, but he's another one that came up with all these programs. Although he wasn't torturing people, these people don't have to. They can do it with a smile, can't they? There can be a smiling knife. They don't have to do that. They can come up with self-actualization and give you 5 things that mean you're self-actualizing type of thing. And if you're not self-actualizing, then you're a failure. But that by following that self-actualization leads you into a trap of thinking you're doing well. But yeah.
Or just making you feel bad, just generally. Just quickly, I opened a magazine the other day, like a Sunday magazine, and it had the 9 things you should have in your kitchen, or how, trendy things. The kitchens were massive with all this expensive. And what the point is you read these things in magazines or even fashion stuff, and it's just to make people feel like shit, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Basically. 10 things your husband should be doing for you. That are totally outlandish, right? They're never going to be able to do any of them.
5 things you should have in your relationship.
Yeah.
This is what you should have in your house this summer. It's
a banning of magazines, one of them. Yeah. And George Harrison here, right? I'm going to come on to him in a little bit, but his adoption of Hindu philosophy and Indian instrumentation. Now, I know Mike Williams has talked about him in the past being a limited guitarist, yet he's now classed as this guru of Hindu philosophy and the sitar, and and he kickstarted the human potential movement. And then we go back to Tavistock being part of the Beatles setup, and Huxley obviously part of all this human potential movement and Tavistock and things like that. But 2 other interesting characters popped up in my research, and they are Michael Murphy and Dick Price. Both attended the hotbed of CIA representation, Stanford and Harvard universities. They founded the Esalen Institute in 1962, primarily as a centre for the study and development of human potential. Just some side notes. The grounds of the Esalen Institute were the home of a Native American tribe known as the SLN, ESSELEN, from whom the Institute adopted its name. Carbon dating, if you believe all that, tests of artifacts found at the Esalen property have indicated a human presence as early as 2600 BC. I heard Crow 777 mention that Shelby Downard said whenever important places were developed, he said or wrote ritual killings took place there at some point. And it's strange that it turns out that 90% of the Esalen population was decimated when they were forcibly relocated to 3 Spanish missions. I like the word Spanish missions, like they're doing him a favour. It's a bit like Gates, isn't it? He's doing a mission in Africa type of thing. We are told that without resistance to European disease, large numbers died from measles, smallpox, syphilis, along with, I like these last 2 or 3 here, starvation, overwork and torture.
Right. Or did they just kill him?
I'd say, well, when we
never
spoke,
know.
can you remember that book when we spoke to David and Dawn, and they told us about what really happened when they were working down mines and stuff like that. The fact is that
I got colds and lice and stuff and died of that. Yeah, bullshit.
Exactly.
Yeah, it probably is bullshit.
Both Murphy and Price developed an interest in human psychology and earned degrees in the subject in 1952. In 1961, they went to look at the property owned by the Murphy family. So this Michael Murphy's parents, or his grandma, I think it was, owned this property. And the Esalen Institute is at Slate's Hot Springs in a place called Big Sur, SUR. It included a rundown hotel occupied by members of a church. The property was patrolled by gun-toting Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah, we've talked about him before, haven't we? He's
yes, strange character, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gay men from San Francisco filled the hot spring baths, on weekends. So you got Hunter S. Thompson, gun-toting Hunter S. Thompson. There was a story there that he caused a lot of trouble and some gay lads beat him up,
right.
Which, again, it seemed a bit odd. He were gun-toting, threatened to hit one of them, but he beat him up even though he were running around with guns. Doesn't make sense, but anyway. So Price's father was vice president of Sears, a massive company, Sears. I don't know if you've heard it, like a big shopping. Yeah. And they incorporated their business as a non-profit named Esalen Institute in 1963. Lots of things happening in 1963. They modelled the concept of Esalen partially on the Trabuco College, founded by Hurd as a quasi-monastic experiment in the mountains of Irvine, California. The Trabuco College was an American retreat co-founded by Gerald Hurd and Aldous Huxley, and operated from 1942 to 1949. So we have Huxley again involved in setting this early mind control venture up. Murphy and Price were assisted by Frederick Spiegelberg, Alan Watts, Huxley and Huxley's wife Laura, as well as Gerald Hurd and Gregory Bateson. And they're interesting individuals. I started looking into them and I thought, how far do you want to go on this, Tom? But yeah, it's noted that Dick Price, founder of Esalen's father, Herman, had emigrated from Lithuania in 1911. During World War I, his father served with the United States Coast Guard and in the United States Navy. And later in life, working, and he had a business with a guy called Raymond Loewy. Raymond Loewy worked for NASA and other government agencies and large corporates. When I read all this, me MK Ultra alarm bells were ringing. And I read, after leaving Harvard in 1955, Dick Price enlisted in the Air Force and was given an assignment. So he enlisted in the Air Force and was given an assignment in the East Bay area, San Francisco Bay Area. He rented a room in San Francisco. Does this sound normal for Sunday? I mean, you have to tell me, I've never been in the army, but he enlisted in the Air Force and he was given an assignment in the East Bay in San Francisco where the hippie movement started 10, 12 years later. He
sounds
rented
like a Secret Service assignment, doesn't it?
So, some kind of, He rented a room in San Francisco. Alan Watts and Frederick Spiegelberg's newly founded American Academy of Asian Studies. That sounds like CIA. The precursor to the California Institute of Integral studies. Spiegelberg was involved in founding the Esalen Institute with Murphy and Dick Price. Anyway, I'm gonna flick on. Dick Price experienced an episode of manic psychosis while he was in San Francisco. On December the 7th, 1956, his parents involuntarily committed him to the Institute of Living, an exclusive mental treatment facility in Connecticut. While hospitalised there, he was misdiagnosed with schizophrenia. You know what happens then, don't you? He was subjected to physical confinement, isolation I think that's called, major tranquilizers, along with numerous electroconvulsive shock treatments and insulin treatments or therapy. While committed, his mother had his marriage annulled and he was released a year later. So that's his assignment to San Francisco, Chris. He ends up in what happened in between?
Yeah.
What happened in between?
Strange story.
Do you know this guy as well? I mean, it reminds me of Frank Olson, but interestingly, Dick Price died on November 25th, 1985, when he was struck by a boulder while hiking near Esalen.
Right, that happens.
Happens all the time, Chris.
Or did someone throw a brick at him?
Yeah. Smack him round the head.
What a strange story. I mean, did he step out of line? Did he decide he didn't want to be involved in his mission?
I don't know.
To San Francisco? It's a strange story, isn't it?
Yeah. Or did he see something he shouldn't have seen? Is he part of some Dr. Ewan Campbell, because they were happening around that time, Gottlieb and that, of some kind of... I mean, for his mum and dad to involve... He got married while he was at that Alan Watts and Spiegelberg's institute. And while he were on that Air Force assignment there, and he got married in it wasn't like a religious ceremony. It was one of these Hindu type ceremonies. So his mum and dad had it annulled while he was incarcerated in this mental asylum, and so his mum and dad threw him in a mental asylum, gave him electroconvulsive shocks. This sounds like they were part of it, but I don't know that, by the way. But it sounds like they were part of the program of some nature.
Maybe stepped out of line. Maybe he was supposed to do something. Stepped out of line.
Yeah. The other founder was Michael Murphy. After graduating from Stanford, he was drafted in the army. No surprise there. And spent 2 years stationed in Puerto Rico as a psychologist. He returned to Stanford for 2 quarters to graduate studies in philosophy before he quit in 1956 to go to India. So the other guy's going to San Francisco, and he's going to India. I know India's a big place, so San Francisco. He practiced meditation for 18 months with a guy called, I'm going to try and pronounce this, Chris, Sri Aurobindo Ashram. And it was another spiritual type community. And this Aurobindo was an Indian philosopher, yogi, Maharishi, poet, Indian nationalist, and he was also a journalist. Varied career. He joined the Indian movement for independence from the British rule in 1910. And he sounds like an agitator, this guy. And he was part of the spiritual reformation in the country, introducing his visions on human progress and spiritual evolution. He's also links to Max Theon, a Polish Jewish Kabbalist and occultist who inspired the Hematic Brotherhood of Luxor in 1884. Interestingly, his father, so this is this guru, his father wanted his sons to enter the Indian Civil Service, ICS, an elite organisation comprising of only 1,000 people, set up by their British colonial masters. So this is the guru that's starting up these schools, right? And he's gone into the Indian Civil Service set up by the British ruling government. Aurobindo studied for the Indian Civil Service at King's College, Cambridge, in England.
It's around the corner.
Just right. Then he became an Indian guru, Chris.
Yeah.
So
it seems like them 1,000 people are working for the Empire to me.
Well, yeah. When you say the Empire, that's weird and all. That sounds weird, but
no, it's true, isn't it? They've been left behind. They did the same in Iraq, didn't they?
Yes.
Left certain Iraqis there to working for the British government, training
Yeah.
up as soldiers.
Yeah. It seems to me like it were a longer term plan, because I'm going to name three of these gurus who the Beatles and all these other people played with, who learnt to play sitar and influenced the music and stuff like this. And all of them have some kind of elite background that look like what you was just say were left behind to work for the empire.
Like as influencers to influence
Yes.
the new society without the empire being there, because we've left.
Yeah. So Ravi Shankar, who we were speaking about earlier, and the Canara School of Music, who was not the peasant guru either. His father was a noted barrister who worked for the Maharaja of Jalawar in Rajasthan. The Jalawar state was a princely state in India during the British Raj, and his mother was descended from the Zamindari family. And a Zamindar is the Indian subcontinent. Zamindar in the Indian subcontinent was an autonomous and semi-autonomous ruler of a province. So this guy, this Ravi Shankar, was quite a famous guy. Some of his music sounds nice, but again, it sounds hypnotic as the music. And they're from backgrounds that you'd say, I'm not saying they're royal or anything like that, but they've certainly been put in charge of his family. These two families who we're mentioning here, it's just two people. The term itself, Zamindar, and somebody from India will correct me here, I hope, and go into more details if you want to send me some information. The term itself came into use during the reign of the Mughals, who later the British, and begun using it as a native synonym for estate. So these people are landowners. That's what it is, an estate. The landowner. It's like the landed gentry in Britain. During the period of British colonial rule in India, many wealthy and influential zamindars were bestowed with princely and royal titles such as Maharaja or Raja or Chaudhry, which was what this guy's Ravi Shankar's father was called. He was called Uday Shankar Chaudhry, and granted the title of Har Chaudhry. I've probably destroyed that, by the Maharajas, which I think means Lord. I think that means Lord. So again, somebody correct me if I've got it wrong. Uday went and studied. So this is his father, went and studied at Oxford, where he became a doctor of philosophy. He was also a respected statesman, lawyer and politician, and he served for several years as a Diwan, which means prime minister, a designated powerful government official, minister or ruler. So this is where these two gurus came from. What I'm trying to say there is that the people that were influencing rock music seemed to be put there by the British colonial government in power. Among the students of Ravi Shankar's Canara School of Music in LA in 1967 was Robbie Krieger and John Densmore of The Doors. Interestingly, Ray Manzarek Jr., who will go into a lot of detail in this presentation, met teenage guitarist Robbie Krieger and drummer John Densmore at a transcendental meditation lecture and recruited them both for The Doors. Densmore said there wouldn't be any Doors without the Maharishi. So what it's basically saying there is that without transcendental music and without this happening in LA, he don't think that the Doors wouldn't have been formed. It seems that even this guru was a construct too. The Maharishi yogi that he's talking about was an Indian yoga guru known for developing and popularizing transcendental meditation, which became popular in the 60s, didn't it? The birth name and birth dates of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi are not known with certainty, in part because the tradition of ascetics and monks to relinquish family connections, which is exactly what they were doing in the 60s, weren't they? They were relinquishing the family values, weren't they? Think about what happened in this period, the breakdown of family values. This guy most likely came from an upper caste family of the high status Kaishta caste, whose traditional profession is writing. They were the writing caste, that's what they used to call them in India, who had historically served the ruling powers as administrators, ministers, record keepers, and I've put here order takers and data collectors. That's what they are, modern day order takers and data collectors.
Yeah, writing the history.
Yeah.
Recording
Yeah.
the history.
In 1968, he started this, the science of creative intelligence was inaugurated at Stanford University and then was offered to 25 other American universities. In 1968, the Maharishi announced that he would stop his public activities and instead begin the training of transcendental meditation teachers at his new global headquarters in Seelisberg, Switzerland. The transcendental movement, meditation movement, is funded. It's a massive organisation now, Chris. It's got 900,000 participants in 1977 and 1 million by 1980, and now it's got 5 million. The global organisation is reported to have an estimated net worth of $3.5 billion to chuck around. It's funded by people.
But if you were involved in transcendental meditation, you wouldn't think that was its background, would you?
No.
You think you were doing something totally organic,
Yes,
spiritual and all that stuff. And look where it goes.
So, just to finish this section off before we get into Ray Manzarek and Jim Morrison, that's why I can't believe that these 60s Indian hippie communes in India and in LA, where rock bands went, were an organic act. When we look at them, they all have the same military members and the same type of backgrounds. Even the yogis that founded them worked and came from the same questionable elite Indian backgrounds run by the British colonial government, like the Indian Civil Service, who then went to London and studied at Cambridge and Oxford. Retrospectively, we can look back and see elite Indian gurus possibly being used by various intelligence programs to insert mind control programs like the Twilight Language via hypnotic transcendental rock music all the way up to the 90s, and using symbols like the smiley face, also used by Nirvana. Nirvana meaning ideal or idyllic place or state. Programming teenagers to be depressed and commit suicide via 21st century MK Ultra techniques that were developed more than 3 generations ago. Is this the ideal or idyllic state of place? To enjoy our servitude or suicide? Maybe via assisted dying, euthanasia. Look what's happening. All these things are happening in front of his eyes. The reason for mentioning the Esalen Institute is on July 10th, 1968, the Beatles guitarist George Harrison was given sitar lessons. So this is 1968. He's been playing guitar for a long time and he's some sort of expert. At the Esalen Institute by Ravi Shankar, founder of the Canary School of Music, for the movie film Raga, produced by Apple Films, or Paul Corpse. We mentioned Apple Corpse and Paul Corpse and its PR manager Derek Taylor in episode 1, if you remember. We are led to believe that George Harrison, who was at best a mediocre guitar player, it seems, is now a leading expert on the sitar. Aldous Huxley was a proponent of the human potential movement and right in the centre of this operation, many years before it was sprung on the populations of the world. We have to assume that this was another operation. Huxley was a lecturer at Esalen and inspired the founding of the Institute. So the story goes, Chris, one of the guys that founded it was given a book, The Doors of Perception, and came up with the idea of the Esalen Institute. And that was the guy that was thrown into that mental asylum, electrocuted, and came out with a great idea of the Esalen Institute. Okay, we're heading into probably the last hour of episode 2. I want to concentrate on some of the type of operations that were active post-World War II, and I'm sure we'll go into a lot more of these further on in this series. These were sort of large and small operations. Some were trials, some were sort of live research happening at the time. Some were actual operations to control people or situations, to start events like the 60s counterculture or control the narrative, like the fake gurus that were used to insert, it looks like, the Indian music or Twilight Language or a certain part of it into music. And not only musicians followed these fake gurus, but also authors and film writers, etc. So we want to cover a couple of people as well. a few people, and a couple of individuals in detail who have been mentioned throughout this episode 2. We will have to leave Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek and the Doors for the next episode, an episode all of its own. This thing, as it's unfolding, is obviously we sort of added up, me and Chris, it's about 18 hours to record. That was after the first episode, and that's probably grown already. Well, it's already added one episode, and we're only 2 episodes in, so there you go. But it's very interesting stuff. I've got to say, it's the most interesting research that I've done, and I think I can speak for Chris on that one as well. I think he slowly but surely getting his research hat on, putting his drawing pen down. So one of the operations that I want to highlight is an operation that were carried out in the early 50s, around the time when Project or Operation Artichoke kicked off, that led into MK Ultra, and that were Operation Midnight Climax, and it was an operation carried out by the CIA as a sub-project of MK Ultra, established in 1954 by Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb based his plan for MK Ultra and Midnight Climax off of interrogation methods used under Project Artichoke. So bear in mind, these operations are interrogation methods, and we've already spoke about the guy that wrote part of the interrogation booklet. That's Ewan Cameron, who worked at the Montreal Clinic in Canada, and I think he might come up when we talk about some of the characters later on. Unlike Project Artichoke, Operation Midnight Climax gave Gottlieb permission to test drugs on unknowing citizens. So these weren't enemies of the state; these were innocent people, which made way for the legacy of the whole operation. Hundreds of federal or feral, whichever way you want to call them, agents took part, and field operatives and scientists worked on these programs before they were shut down Kosovo in the 1960s. Right? I don't believe, I'm sure Kristen, you don't believe either, dear, that these programs have ever stopped.
No. I think they were just getting them ready to put onto the masses, if anything, when you say.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
Training.
It seems like these were just getting these things in place.
Research together. Yeah.
Yeah. As we're seeing now, I mean, the latest revelations about Hancock is coming out and revealing what they did. This is all part of that, and don't think that is...
Well, that information wouldn't exist in the public eye if they didn't want it to exist.
No, these people are psychopaths. So Operation Midnight Climax, as I said, started in 1954 and consisted of a web of CIA-run safe houses in San Francisco at 225 Chestnut Street and Mill Valley, California, as well as New York City. Midnight Climax was established in order to study the effects of LSD on non-consenting individuals. Just think about what that says there for a minute. And I'm sure some people who listen to this have heard of Operation Midnight Climax. Non-consenting individuals, and think about what's happened since 2020. And this is, and also things in the water and food and things like that. That's an extension of this. To study the effects of LSD or a drug on non-consenting individuals. Prostitutes on the CIA payroll were instructed to lure clients back to these safe houses where they were surreptitiously plied with a wide range of substances, including LSD, and then monitored from behind a one-way mirror or glass. And I would say they probably recorded some of these, and they were probably used in different operations. I mean, are these similar to the sort of drug parties, the hippie love parties, which we're going to come on to now, or Esalen Institute? Were some of these recorded? Some of these people, the same people who went to the Esalen Institute? It reminds me of The Godfather, Chris, doesn't it you?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, yeah. I mean, that scene exactly, literally behind the two-way glass.
Yeah.
That's literally straight out of it, isn't it?
And the guy that we're going to come on to in a minute, Hunter S. Thompson, he was a part of supposedly some cover-up, and he was apparently filming these things that were happening during the Franklin. What was it called? The Franklin
Scandal.
Yeah.
Franklin cover up, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, the book based on it. The guy in there basically said that he was witness to Hunter S. Thompson videoing a kid getting murdered, basically making snuff films. Basically.
So we'll come on to that in a second anyway. But these are all part of the same principle. We're talking of drugged out people whose morals have disappeared. In 1960, after completing a graduate fellowship in creative writing at Stanford University, that's another place that keeps popping up. It's one of these CIA hotbeds of universities where MKUltra was being used. Author Ken Kesey of Stanford University was invited by a neighbour and a Stanford psychology graduate, which is interesting, Vic Lovell, to take part in, well, Kesey volunteered, in what turned out to be a CIA-financed study under the cover of Project MKUltra in a highly secret military program at the Menlo Park Veterans Hospital, where he worked as a night aide. So we've got a secret military operation run by the CIA that is doing a secret LSD, drug, etc. test in a veterans hospital. Ill, obviously. They've fought for their own country. They've done the hero thing again. We're seeing these people tested on. And Ken Kesey was there working, and he volunteered himself to take these drugs. Anyway,
was he a veteran as well? In fact, I think
no,
he was. No.
I don't know. I didn't go into his background. He wasn't somebody. He's somebody we need to work on because we already spoke about doing the Beat Generation people. Because
he says he was working there as like a cleaner, was it?
Well, an aide, a nurse, an assistant, whatever. Yeah,
right.
Maybe pushing people around in wheelchairs or changing beds, whatever. Yeah. They're probably earning extra cash while they were at Stanford University. Kesey wrote. Sorry, the project studied the effects of psychedelic drugs like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, cocaine, AMT, and DMT. So when people think that they started using DMT now, this were already being experimented on back in 50s and 60s and before. And so anybody going on these adventures, taking DMT and spacing out, it's a controlled idea. Like a lot of these things, I'm into my bodybuilding. I saw mates taking steroids. That's a controlled event as well. They want it's a eugenics event. They want to see what happens to these people. They don't care if a guy can lift a car up. They want to see it.
I wouldn't say if you go and do DMT in a rainforest somewhere with a shaman, I wouldn't say that's the same thing though.
No, I wouldn't say it's the same thing. But I think the whole thing. Bear in mind, if you went to do DMT with a shaman, and then you come back into working the city for argument's sake, that's totally different from being a shaman living there, isn't it?
Well, also you've got a different thing, which is they don't just go and pop a pill; they do a whole spiritual
journey
shenanigans around it. Yeah, that goes on for days. Apparently, it's not just you just go there and it blows up your nose and you're off your nuts.
Kesey's role as a medical guinea pig, as well as his stint working in the Veterans Administration Hospital, inspired him to write One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest in 1963. The book itself, you've read the book, and I know you've watched the film.
Yeah,
it terrified me.
One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest is a great film, but in the book, it's from the point of view of the big Indian guy, the guy who is always. That's why I said was he a janitor, because he was always stood with a broom.
Right.
And in the book, he trips out all the time. But he's the one watching the Jack Nicholson character from the film. So it's all from his point of view. And that's why I just thought maybe he was... but he's kind of just a silent figure in it. But the book's good and the film's good, to be fair.
He fell out with the producers because he wanted it telling from...
He
wanted it telling from the big Indian guys.
Right.
He wanted it carrying on, that story carrying on. And he didn't want Jack Nicholson as the lead. He wanted Gene Hackman, apparently.
Right. I would say the book is very trippy, whereas the film isn't at all, is it? It's just a straightforward kind of asylum film.
It does introduce electro-convulsive shock treatment into the minds of people, doesn't it?
Yeah. And on a bigger scale, when you think about it, especially now, he's sane, he's in a lunatic asylum, and he can't get out because he's sane.
Yeah. You're mad because you've seen people who are mad.
Yeah, a few parallels there. And
There's
he's
a lot of
questioning
parallels there.
authority, the main woman, Nurse Ratchet.
Right. Which could be Chris Whitter.
Well, she could be the system as it is.
Yeah.
She's symbolic of that system.
Yeah. This Kesey guy, he frequently entertained friends and many others with parties he called acid tests. So when you say, oh, that's an acid test, it came from this guy involving music, including musicians like the Grateful Dead were at these parties.
Mm.
Other first-hand, and there were lots of other people that went there. I think Alan Ginsberg went there. You know, lots of other of the Beat Generation, because Kesey were one of the leaders of the Beat Generation. So a lot of these people were going there and having these parties and tripping out. The reason I mentioned acid test, because acid tests appear as well in the next guy we're going to discuss in a bit more detail in his book, Hell's Angels, The Strange and Terrible Saga of the Outlaw Motorcycle Gangs by Hunter S. Thompson. He's an interesting character. Hunter S. Thompson has been mentioned already in this episode. And I'm going to let Chris, what do you know about Hunter S. Thompson? Because you've told me some interesting stories about him over the last couple of years.
Well, like I just mentioned, I mean, I became familiar with him from, like most people, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is one of them books that everyone's told they got to read, you know, so you do. And then there was the film directed by Terry Gilliam with Johnny Depp in it. And I think I would say that that's probably the first time that the adrenochrome thing was ever brought up. I mean, it's in the film. I'm pretty sure it's in the book as well, where he says he's got, I mean, the film's old now. The film's over 20 years old. The book's obviously even older. But that's only just come on everyone's radar last 5 years or so, I suppose, would you say?
Yeah.
So that's odd. And I mean, I always found him a bit creepy, to be fair, Hunter S. Thompson. But and also, is he one of them who's been lauded up and put on a pedestal for no real reason? I mean, Fear and Loathing's all right, but he's got more attention than he deserves, I would say. So, like a lot of these Beat Generation guys, or this kind of, they get a lot more attention than they're supposed to. They should do, really, you know. And we see that nowadays, don't we, with certain actors or pop stars or whatever, or writers or whatever. They get more attention than they seem to deserve, like they've been literally put there on purpose. And I'd say Hunter S. Thompson's one of them. And like I was on about earlier in the Franklin cover-up, and it's a strange angle to go out on, but this kid says that he witnessed the murder, and Hunter S. Thompson was literally videoing it as a snuff film. So I don't know. I mean, he was close friends with Johnny Depp, wasn't he? I think he got him to fire his ashes into the sky in a rocket. And I think Johnny Depp did it himself.
Right.
I think he
I
might
know
have
there were quite a few actors there, weren't they, at his funeral?
Yeah. So he had a big influence on people.
And senators and people like that. John Kerry, I think, was there.
Yeah, that's right. John Kerry was there. We did a whole thing about him when we did the Johnny Depp thing, didn't we? And he made, I think, a director was making Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I think it was the English director, Alex Cox. And then he left it, and Terry Gilliam took charge of it. And then they made another film about Hunter S. Thompson with Johnny Depp playing him again when he was younger. I think when he was in Portugal, was it? Puerto Rico. When he was in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, yeah.
Yeah. And that's where he met his missus, who he then went on to have all those in-court fights with.
Right.
So, yeah, I've never... Amber Heard. And Hunter S. Thompson his claim to fame was he invented gonzo journalism, which is where you're not just reporting a story, you're part of the story, i.e. as in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He goes to Las Vegas to report on a story, and he takes loads of drugs and he gets directly involved in the story. So he
makes a story, basically.
Yeah, and it's around him, which you see now in journalism. So he maybe did invent that, I don't know. But it were always, I mean, maybe it was a slightly more, dysfunctional system like journalism then. But like we were saying, he's got given a load of money and he's got to write this story, and then he spends it all on drugs. I mean, it's kind of a romantic vision of a journalist, isn't it? It's not an actual where you get paid to do a job and then you do it, Maybe it was different back then, but it seems like a romantic ideal version of it, not really a real system of it.
Yeah, and he's got this persona of being this gun-toting rebel rouser as well.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go into some of his background, and I haven't gone into any depth here. And these next two people, we've already discussed, as we've been saying, doing in-depth shows as part of all this. Really, as we said, a lot of this information is sparking us off in different branches to go down different routes. But obviously, we want to stick to the main part of the theme of this, which is links back, echoes of the Huxleys in this part one of the series of Brave New World Order. We want to try and stick to the echoes, and these are the echoes. These are the people that are carrying on this usage of drugs, writing these stories, pushing the narrative, changing changing the way we live, basically, by pushing this information down us, or being allowed to push this information. And I think these next two people that we talk about, Hunter S. Thompson, and the next one, Philip K. Dick, I think we'll realise that these people, like the pop stars that Mark Devlin, Dave McGowan, and Mike Williams has done research on, you can see that these pop star journalists, if you like, have also been part of this MK Ultra controlled release of information as well. And they're victims as well, because when you can see that, that they're right in the same place as Manson and all these other people. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about it. There's no hiding away from it. Anyway, we'll go back to, in the early 50s, Hunter S. Thompson, completed his basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. So here we have another one who's in the Army, stroke Navy, Army, Air Force, etc. Now, that ain't unusual, as me and Chris were speaking about this. A lot of people were signed up to the Army, but there are a few unusual things.
Especially
this rang my... Yo, mate.
After the Second World War in the 50s, I would imagine, everyone wants to prove the worth. So there might have been a bit more people in joining up to the military, I mean.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's feasible.
Now, but this rang my sort of MK Ultra alarm bells again, and I wondered where I'd recently heard of Lackland Air Force Base that I just mentioned. And then I remembered. Interestingly, Tom O'Neill, the author of Chaos, that I know you've been listening to, the book about the Manson murders, tells an awful story about regarding Lackland Air Force Base. Joly West, the professor or doctor who was part of the MK Ultra stroke Manchurian candidate development and the CIA. This story is about an Air Force or an airman from Lackland Base named Jimmy Shaver. He had no history or criminal record, and it seems that there was some kind of MK Ultra operation going on at the base. So he's an abbreviated story. It's not a nice story, so I apologise, but here we go. The victim, 3-year-old Sherry Jo Horton, had disappeared around midnight outside the Air Force Base, where her parents had left her in the parking lot outside a bar. She played with her brother while they had a drink inside. When they noticed her missing, they formed a search party. Within an hour, the group came upon a car parked next to a gravel pit. Sherry's underwear was hanging from one of the car doors. Shaver wandered out of the darkness. He was shirtless, covered with blood and scratches, making no attempt to escape. He let the search party walk him to the edge of the highway. Bystanders described him as dazed and in a trance-like state, and booked for murder and rape. Though he still didn't remember anything, he reasoned he must have done it. The commander of the base hospital, Colonel Robert S. Bray, ordered a psychiatric evaluation to be performed by Dr. Julian West. Joly West, the head of psychiatric services at the base. It fell to West to decide if Shaver had been legally sane at the time of the murder. Shaver spent the next 2 weeks under West's supervision. They returned to the scene of the crime, trying to jog his memory. Later, West hypnotised Shaver and gave him an injection of sodium pentothal, truth serum. Remember we were talking about that stuff earlier on? While Shaver was under, according to a testimony, he recalled the events of that night. He confessed to killing Horton. She'd brought out repressed memories of his cousin, Beth Rainboat, who'd sexually abused him as a child. Shaver had started drinking at home that night, when he had visions of God, who whispered into his ear to seek out and kill the evil girl Beth. The airman was found guilty, and in 1958, on his 33rd birthday, he was executed by electric chair. He always maintained his innocence. According to newly surfaced papers from West's archives, the psychiatrist had some of the clearest, most nefarious ties of any scientist to the CIA's Project MK Ultra. Now that's an abbreviated description of what went on at Lackland Air Force Base at the time when he was there. Thompson was there. Certainly Joly West was there, because Thompson was there from 1952, I do believe I said. He was there from 1952, I do believe. And he must have known about this. He must have known about this, unless he was part of the project. I'm not saying he was part of that. I'm saying part of the project. In 1956, Hunter S. Thompson transferred to Eglin Air Force Base. He'd been transferred a few times. I think he got transferred in 1954 before this, and then 1956 to Eglin Air Force Base. While serving at Eglin, he took evening classes at Florida State University. I didn't know if he could do that while he were in the army, but maybe he could. At Eglin, he landed his first professional writing job as sports editor of the Commander Courier, and he got the job by falsifying his job experience, which is something else we see quite a lot in this work. In 1958, he was an airman first class, so he'd been in the Air Force quite a long time, from probably six years-ish. So he was more or less a career airman at that particular point, you'd say, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And from what you know about his personality, you wouldn't have thought he'd be a guy taking orders and going down that path, would you?
No. Well, again, in 1958, while he was an airman first class, his commanding officer recommended him for an early honourable discharge. In summary, his commanding officer said, "This airman, although talented, will not be guided by policy."
No.
It took him 6 years to work that out. Chief of Information Services Colonel William S. Evans wrote to the Eglin Personnel Office, "Sometimes his rebel and superior attitude seems to rub off on other airmen and staff members." So we've got a guy, again, who's booted out of the Air Force. Is it under strange circumstances? I don't know. But he's released after 6 years, and where they've just found out that he's a rebel.
Yeah.
All the way through this, and this, again, we need to go into more detail in this, and I could have gone into more detail if we'd have had more time at the end of this podcast, but it all seems like it's like a narrative building. I mentioned earlier that Thompson visited San Francisco and eventually lived in Big Sur, where he worked as a security guard and caretaker at the Slate's Hot Springs for an 8-month period in 1961, just before it became the Esalen Institute. And that's where it was like a gay club with hot springs. At 5:42 on February the 20th, 2005, Thompson died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head at Owl Farm, his fortified compound in Woody Creek, Colorado. Thompson's story seems like the narrative story, building a narrative story just like Oswald's, and there's loads of them like that I've come across in this era, this research, where they've been close to psychiatrists like Julian West or Dr. Ewan Cameron. They've been in the military. They've ended up with psychiatric problems. They've been drug addicts, but they've been famous.
Yeah.
I mean, that story there from the beginning with that murder of that little girl, and that guy were blamed for it. And Thompson was there, or at Lackland. It must have been there at the same time. Why has he never mentioned that in his writings? I couldn't find anywhere that he'd mentioned MK Ultra the guy that run MK Ultra was a psychiatrist at his Air Force base.
And that murderer was clearly an MK Ultra victim.
I mean, if you read the full report, it's on I'll try and remember to put the link in, but it's on Tom O'Neill's on a blog that he wrote, and it's a lot longer than that, by the way. I just took snippets out of there. He says it on some podcast as well.
But that description to me just sounds like what we know as a
Saran, Oswald. Yeah. It's the same principle, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if it was, I read about the psychiatrists, and what they were saying was that they used LSD because if they wanted to program somebody to say, go kill somebody, stab that person there, they wouldn't be able to do it by doing that. What they say is, stab that piece of wood and stab it hard, and show them how to stab that piece of wood. But that piece of wood turns out to be an individual then. That's how they program people.
And they've done it, they're blooded, aren't they, as you would say?
Yes, yeah. And that goes back to then, the reason I mentioned that Operation Midnight Climax, because the spin-offs from that, like the Godfather type spin-off, is that these people are witnesses to these type of events, and then they have to carry out. Bear in mind, the witnesses to these type of events while they're drugged out of the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's too late then. You're in it, aren't you? You've got no, there's no back out.
And I think some of these people are, I think some of these people are victims. I don't think they're all psychopaths. Might turn them into psychopaths, but I don't think they're all victims. And Hunter S. Thompson seems like he was playing the part of the rebel. Matt Devlin calls them lifetime actors. Chris has just called him an actor. And I don't think they know what they're doing a lot of the times. They're working to some sort of programming, aren't they? And every now and again it cracks, that programming.
Yeah, it would seem something like that.
The evidence is starting to stack throughout this research, pointing to the construct. For example, if new recruits at military bases, all of them will be evaluated by the camp psychologist or psychiatrist, who themselves are, for a number of reasons, they're evaluated for a number of reasons. Firstly, and officially, to make sure they get the good airmen, if that's what they're looking for, that can handle the job or the role that they're going to be there for. And secondly, more clandestinely, they're working for a top secret operation like MK Ultra that even the head of the camp doesn't even know about, to find the best candidates for these top secret missions. So let's just say they see 100 people. They would only pick maybe 5 that go through to that secret operation. And then they'd pick another, probably 1 out of them 5. And it'd be the secret operation to use these people. And they won't even know they're being used. They won't even know they're part of that operation. And if these psychiatrists happen to be a leading CIA specialist who is able to hypnotise certain people within minutes. I mean, I think it was 45 minutes. He said he could turn somebody into basically a jellyfish. Then what hope have these people have got? And if that psychiatrist has looked after Jack Ruby Slippers and Charles Manson, you throw them 2 into the mix there, and countless other people. You've got to ask yourself, haven't you? Was Hunter S. Thompson and a number of other people who were there utilised for whatever? I mean, he might have used Hunter S. Thompson to be a famous writer at some point, right? He might have used another one to be an assassin.
I think something we've realised is if they're controlling entertainment, I think writers have got to be part of it, haven't they?
I would say they're a bigger part of it, Chris.
Yeah.
Because it's more of a subliminal message, isn't it, writers? They're not, all right, they're famous, some of them, but they're not. Their work, people are reading Brave New World now.
Hunter S. Thompson was more of a cult writer, wasn't it? So his books are cult books, as you call them.
Yeah.
But they're still in Waterston.
Yeah. They're still there, even though he was drugged out of his mind.
Yeah.
This Joly West, This Joly West listed 4 groups who we said would be ideal guinea pigs: basic airmen, volunteers, patients, and others possibly prisoners in the local stockade. So you've got basic airmen, Hunter S. Thompson. You've got volunteers, Ken Kesey. You've got patients at that place Kesey were working at, and you've got prisoners. Joly West's boss was Sidney Gottlieb. He was head of MK Ultra for the CIA, and he had at least 185 researchers working across many different institutions across America and Canada. Literally, you'd never get the number. You'd never get the number. That covers 185 bases when you only need one of them. Let's just say there's 5 psychiatrists working at Lackland Air Force Base. You only need one Joly West because you're not looking for every single person that comes through, are you?
No.
West was Chief Psychiatry Service, United States Air Force Hospital, Lackland Air Force Base, between 1952 and 1956. West was an officer in the United States Air Force Medical Service from 1948 to 1956, attaining rank of Major. Cornell University, where West completed his residency in psychiatry, was an MK Ultra institution and the site of the Human Ecology Fund. The Human Ecology Fund was a CIA-funded operation through Cornell University College of Human Ecology Society for the investigation of human ecology to support covert research on brainwashing. And Joly West was given the grant. He was given the grant to run that operation at Cornell University. Who on earth did he have as stooges to run that operation? You know, who was he utilising there? How many leading figures went to Cornell University?
Well, also, even when they admitted the MK Ultra program, you've kind of, I mean, you're explaining how large it was. You've kind of got in your mind one or two slightly nutty professors somewhere. You know what I mean? That's kind of the imagery it brings up, not a massive operation like that.
Well, I mean, again, I think you've got to ask, was Joly West running an MK Ultra recruitment project for Gottlieb at the time at Lackland Air Force Base? If so, was he recruiting these lifetime actors?
And also, you have to remember, once they've signed up for the army, they've signed up, haven't they?
Yes.
Do you think that's what gives them the right to do this stuff to them?
Well, I think they've got a right, but I think even this was so top secret, they never told them they were doing it. So I would hazard a guess that it were probably illegal. But who'd know? If somebody went nuts, then you're nuts, aren't you? You can't prove somebody's hypnotised you.
No.
You can prove somebody give you a jab and he keeled over, probably, if they give you a fair trial. But there's no way you can prove that somebody's hypnotised you. Look at that poor guy at the beginning. He's come out of there, and whether he did that or not, it sounded like even the people who were searching for him that probably wanted to kick his head in said he looked dazed and confused. And
funky going.
there was another part to that. I'm sure he was suffering from horrible headaches as well, I read. Both before and after, during his trial and stuff like that, which is another sign of, maybe being electrocuted, maybe being poisoned with something. So we're going to come on. The last person we're going to talk about in this episode 2 is another interesting character. Do you want to go into what you were telling me earlier that you'd researched on?
Well,
Philip K. Dick?
To start with, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Philip K. Dick because he wrote Blade Runner, Total Recall, Man in the High Castle, Adjustment Bureau, and a lot of other novels. Those are the ones that have been made into films. But one thing I would say, because I went through a bit of a Philip K. Dick period, as you do when I just read loads of stuff by the same author, and you realise, like they do with films, I suppose, they take the premise of the film, of the book, sorry, because a lot of them were short stories as well, they weren't actually novels, and then they expand it into an action with a load of fighting and stuff. But if you've seen Minority Report, if you watch that now, That is pretty creepy.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, and also you got Blade Runner, which is, I suppose, probably the first film actually, that shows human-looking androids,
Right.
replicants, as they're called in there. Well, that and Alien, I suppose, and they were both directed by Ridley Scott,
Yeah.
planting that seed in '80s of artificial intelligence, I suppose, aren't
Yeah.
they? But I like Philip K. Dick's books. I mean, he'd be described as paranoid, and a lot of the themes in his books are like a total distrust of reality, if you like, where nothing is actually what it seems.
That'll
But
never happen.
I decided to watch. I watched a quick, like an hour's long documentary, pretty mainstream one. It was just called the documentary Philip K. Dick, I think, and it was only in 9 parts. Yeah, Philip K. Dick, a documentary. It was in 9 parts, and I thought, like you said, I'd just watch it and see if any MK Ultra alarm bells rang. And if I'm honest, I really didn't want them to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted it to be a straightforward rags to riches story kind of thing, because he didn't really get.
Never quite turns out that way though, Chris, does it?
He didn't really get as famous as he is now because he was a bit of a cult figure until Blade Runner came out. Like you said, he died before it got released, but I think he saw it and he liked it. I think I heard that story. But he starts off with the typical struggling author story, where he's got no money, he's got his wife, and he's really. And I think this, and I even started to lose a bit of it. I thought, yeah, it's just going to be a basic rags to riches story where he becomes famous. But he's living with his wife, and in the 70s, he started saying he had a series of, in 1974, a series of extrasensory experiences, and he said he was having encounters with God, which is
Not dissimilar from Jimmy Shaver. We're having experience with God, or even Peter Sutcliffe.
Yeah, but the vision I had of Philip K. Dick, just reading his books and watching his films, wherever. I'd heard that he was on amphetamines a lot, and you just get this vision of an obsessive author, because he wrote a lot of short stories. I think he produced loads, but never got famous for them.
It says here 121 short stories he wrote.
I mean, that's a lot, isn't it?
44 novels.
A lot of those films are short stories.
Right.
But he was with his wife, and he was struggling, and apparently she was really supportive of him becoming an author. She really believed in him. But this is where it started, and I'm thinking, oh, this is just a normal, and then it started getting weird, because you're talking in McCarthy era, so that could explain some of his paranoia, But then he's got to a weird bit, and this was in the documentary. The FBI asked him to spy on his own wife, because she was in a communist group. And then the FBI started visiting him, and I thought that's straight away a little bit odd. But even the interviewed his ex-wife, because I think he had like 5 wives, and she said she described the FBI as inept and funny, right?
Right.
And then she said one of them taught Phil how to drive, and he was a really nice guy, which is, again, would you say that's kind of peculiar for her?
Yes, I would do. Yes, yeah.
And then it said they moved house to another area. I haven't written all the details now. And this woman showed up at their house. She's called Anne Rubenstein, and she wanted to befriend him because she was into literature and authors. So she became friends with Philip K. Dick and his wife. Anyway, Philip K. Dick ran off with her and ended up moving in with Anne. And then he was saying earlier on that they had no money before he moved in with Anne. He was skinned. I think one of his mates even described that they were eating dog food. But then he moved in with Anne, and then it all of a sudden described that he rented. I mean, she might have had some money because her ex-husband was quite rich, quite well known. But then it went from him being poverty to having a cabin in the country where he used to do his writing obsessively, and then he became an amphetamine addict. And then he was striving for mainstream success. Now, the Anne woman's ex-husband, he was a famous editor of a magazine in New York where Allen Ginsberg got first published. Now, you've mentioned Allen Ginsberg before, and he's he was a beat poet, apparently.
Yeah.
I think he was a university beat poet.
Yeah.
And I think he wrote a poem called Howl, because he was gay, about being gay. and it caused loads of controversy and all kinds of. So you can imagine, can't you? The meeting,
Yeah. In them days, yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another interesting bit was, so he's now dating his ex-wife, and he thinks some of that literary world will rub off on him and it'll make him more famous. So he starts writing more mainstream science fiction novels, if you like. But then they start to have marital problems. And he ends up seeing her ex-husband's psychiatrist. This is a bit I thought was weird. This was MK Ultra Lambo. And she says that he befriended the psychiatrist. He worked his charm on her. Because another thing I realised watching that was, I always thought he was a bit of an introverted character, but apparently he wasn't. He didn't sound like a very, I'm guessing, he didn't sound that nice, to be fair. He moved around a lot with different women.
Well, a lot of these people seem narcissistic, Chris.
Yeah. I mean, I think he had 5 wives, maybe 6. I think it was 5.
I mean, that doesn't make him not nice, but
No.
that alone. But it's more the tendencies become narcissistic.
Maybe these women were controllers, I started to think when I was reading this.
When you're reading that out to me, it sounded like a lot of these people are inserted into their lives.
Why did this woman just turn up and say she was interested in, even the way they described it in the short documentary? But they start seeing the same shrink their ex-husband did, right? And then she got committed for being insane.
Probably because maybe she spotted something and she shouldn't have done. I don't know. What we're finding with a lot of these people is, we're just mentioning 2 now, but when we go through the whole list of these people, that a lot of them are either committed, they're insane, they're doing themselves in, they're all drug addicts, they're all alcoholics, whatever it is, they all end up doing themselves in. It's a strange story, isn't it? A mishmash
all those
of
things you just mentioned means you're struggling with life. So you're maybe not agreeing with what's going on around you or whatever.
But then what do we see now in our lives? That these people, the famous people, are living that way. So now people in suburbia are living that way as well.
She mentioned a story, the Anne woman, his ex, that she invited him, he told her to come round when they'd split up, and he pulled a gun on her. They got children as well. Right. And he said that he was scared because he was going nuts, that he was scared for her and her family and his kids.
Right.
It just sounded like another one of those weird romanticized nonsense stories, to be honest with you. It didn't.
Yeah.
He also said when he was in his cabin in the middle of nowhere that a gigantic metallic face appeared in the sky.
Right.
And spoke to him. I mean, he said a lot of crazy stuff. But then he was famously, do you remember I'm sure you've seen that, where he announces at a press conference that the whole of life's a simulation. So, I mean, I don't know, was he right? I don't know. But then when he split up with the woman Anne, he met, and this is another thing, he just gelled this in. It said he met a family, right? Yeah. And he immediately fell in love with one of their daughters. She didn't want to know what to do with him because she thought he were nuts, apparently. But then he ended up going out with a sister who had just come out of a mental asylum, weirdly. And she was 19 years old. I don't know how old he was at the point. But so he started seeing this girl, Nancy, who was 19, and then they got married. And he split with her, but he carried on hanging around. And then, again, she's come out of a mental asylum. It says she had some, criminal friends and drug dealer friends. And he started hanging around with them because he was getting more hooked on drugs. This is the kind of picture they're painting. But then he had a house, and this reminded me of the Laurel Canyon stuff. He had an open house, and apparently people just used to come and go and all this stuff. I mean, who lives like that? I mean, did they live like that in the 70s? I don't know. But it just sounded strange. And then he was getting more paranoid, and then he got robbed, and he said they tried to blow his safe up and blow open his cupboards, and he was convinced the FBI were after. He convinced of all kinds of stuff that they were. So the paranoia bit was where apparently his books are written from a very paranoid, nothing is real kind of world. So it all fitted into his. And when he got robbed and his safe blown up, it kind of convinced him that he was right all along. So his paranoia was real, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, maybe that were an inserted thing, and so was his safe getting blown up.
Well, they said it looked like it was professionally done, like militaristically done almost. That his safe got blown up. And they're trying to find papers in his safe. And And he also said he only ever took 2 trips, and his mate was in the documentary and said he gave them to him. And he said, on one of his trips, he could speak pure Latin, even though he didn't know any Latin.
Right.
He had a trip and thought he was a Roman gladiator, and he was speaking Latin. And his mate, who, like you said, with a bit more research,
One of his alter egos, you reckon?
I don't know, but I thought his mate was strange because he said, "I'm the only one who ever gave him a trip."
Yeah, but
like
he
you said,
has
with a bit
taken
more
mescaline.
research,
He did take mescaline.
You'd find out who his mate was, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, there'll be several
And you'd find
characters
out
within that.
psychiatrists, the wives.
Yeah.
And he said, he could speak in fluid, experienced
Fluent.
Latin.
Yeah.
Fluent. Yeah. And he said it was like he'd spoke it forever, and he spoke Latin. Then another weird one was he went to Canada on some kind of literary trip. I don't know. But he tried to commit suicide. I mean, if you're going on a trip, I'm not saying I know, but he's planned a trip to go to Canada, and you get there and you do your talk or whatever he's doing, and then you try and commit suicide. And then he put himself into rehab. He said on the documentary that it was a heroin rehab. But again, alarm bells ring, don't they?
They do ring, yeah.
Did you just put yourself in a rehab?
I mean,
just
would you really know where these rehab centres were? I don't know. Would you ask Night Porter?
Yeah, I don't know. And then another strange story was he said he was coming back to the US, and this professor, he was destitute. He'd split with his missus. He had nowhere to go. And this professor read out, it was a strange story, read out the letter that he'd got from Philip K. Dick saying he was destitute. And the student said, "Oh, we'll take him, and we've got a spare dorm." I mean, yeah, another fantastical story, I thought. Yeah. And then as it got later on, I've nearly done it. Another strange one was he said he met someone, he got involved with a minister, a priest guy. I won't go into that, but he said someone was wearing one of the religious effigies, the fish Christian effigy, and this beam of light came off it, and this pink beam went into his head, and he said it was a vision. And then his son was ill, and they couldn't find out what it was. And he had this dream that his son had a hernia that could be, serious. So he told his wife or his ex-wife, and she said, yes, it was true. He did have that hernia when she went to the doctor. So he thought he'd had a vision from God, basically.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of bizarre. I mean, I went into that thinking I'm going to find nothing at all.
Well, let's see if when you listen to this bit, it'll add to what you've just talked about there, and probably fill in maybe fill in a few gaps. Although we're not going into any depth on these. These are people. They're not important to me, but they're important people within the narrative of this counterculture, 60s, second generation Huxley type movement.
Well, again, Philip K. Dick could be described. He started off as a cult writer, I would suppose, but then he merges into a load of massive Hollywood films with directors like Ridley Scott and Steven Spielberg involved.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, was he set up at the beginning all them years ago, ready for the film industry? I don't know, but it seems kind of funky. They were saying that the FBI thought. Apparently, one of the stories was he must have inside information because a lot of he writes about ends up coming true.
Right. Well,
whether that's a true story or just another
one of those, to get him a cult following.
But I think I heard it mentioned as well that he thought he was getting the voices and the visions he had were technology beamed into his head. I think he's mentioned that as well. So I mean, everything in it literally adds up to some kind of MK Ultra. Really?
Everything, and that's what I mean. Everything. I mean, these characters like this? Who do you know in your life that are like that?
Yeah, and they seem to go from, like the Laurel Canyon stuff. They go from skint, but they just can travel wherever they want.
Yeah, like free reign, like Hunter S. Thompson with all them jobs he had.
Yeah, and then going to a rehab centre, which costs a fortune. They just seem to be able to do these things, and everything happens in a weird coincidence.
Yeah. Well, just to finish off, Philip K. Dick, and I'll do the official narrative. He was an American science fiction writer who wrote 44 novels and 121 short stories, most of which appeared in science fiction magazines during his lifetime. His fiction explored a varied philosophical and social questioning, such as the nature of reality, perception, there's that word again, human nature and identity. and commonly featured characters struggling against elements such as alternate realities, illusionary environments, monopolistic corporations,
Mm. A lot
drug
of his
abuse.
books are about commerce, to be fair. I
Right,
forgot to mention that. A lot of his books, not like the films, it's about commerce. Like,
right,
for instance, if you take Total Recall, I mean, it's obviously an Arnie action film, but in the
mm,
book, it's about the company that do the mind thing, where they
yes,
blank the mind. And
yeah,
yes, it's about the industry around it all. And like The Man in the High Castle, which they made into a TV series by Ridley Scott again. The basic story is that the Nazis win.
right,
But then this truth starts to leak through that maybe the Allies won. So it's kind of
right,
a upside down version story of that. Which again, I think that won quite a lot of awards. Did that?
right.
But yeah, sorry, go on.
It's all right. His books also explore illusionary environments, as I mentioned, authoritarian governments, and altered states of consciousness. He attended University of California, Berkeley, from September 1949 to November 11th, 1949, which was a short time. I think Huxley did a talk at Berkeley in 1962 as well. That's Aldous Huxley. He dropped out because of ongoing anxiety problems. That's why it only lasted a year, according to his third wife, Anne's memoirs. And he also disliked the mandatory ROTC training, which is the Reserve Officers Training Corps, which is a group of college and university-based officer training programs for training commissioned officers of the United States Armed Forces. Now, I'm not saying he was there for long. It looks like we were only there for a year, which run alongside him being at university. So these training courses were running alongside him being at university. But
Right.
he had to drop out of these because he had anxiety problems, which again leads you back to that MK Ultra programming, because California and Berkeley were, again, MK Ultra hotspots.
Mm.
Philip K. Dick died of a stroke 4 months before the release of Blade Runner. So you mentioned Blade Runner. The film based on his novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Mm. Yeah, good book. It's quite funny actually, which is weird because you see Blade Runner, it's like a brooding nightmare, but the book's actually really funny. He's a very funny writer as well,
Right.
surprisingly, considering the dark subjects.
Just as a spin-off, the United States government was searching for the perfect truth serum, which began in the spring of 1942. General Wild Bill Donovan, chief of the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor to the CIA, asked a select group of prominent scientists to develop a speech-inducing drug for use in interrogating enemy spies, Nazi sympathizers, and prisoners of war. He gave carte blanche, insisting that the need for such a weapon was great enough to justify the means necessary to create it. Trials tested alcohol, barbiturates, caffeine, peyote, and scopolamine before settling on potent extracts of cannabis. This was, as Martin Lee writes in Acid Dreams, the complete social history of LSD, the CIA, the 60s, and beyond. The first concerted attempt on the part of an American espionage organization to modify human behavior through chemical means. LSD soon became MKUltra's drug of choice, and within a few years, an extensive network of research projects had been set up at hospitals and universities throughout the United States and the world. An interesting side note was that Phillips's father, Joseph Eggerdick, worked for the United States Department of Agriculture. And guess who also worked there for a time? Sidney Gottlieb, who then went on to work and run MK Ultra for the CIA. I'm not saying he knew him. I know that the Department of Agriculture will be a huge setup, and I'm not saying Philip K. Dick's dad knew Gottlieb, but it can also be a cover. And
The funny thing, Fatty, is in that short documentary I watched, it never mentioned his dad.
Right.
Not once.
Right. Interesting. But it is known that the CIA and the US Department of Agriculture work together on programs, and have done for years, especially biological programs. George W. Merck, who we mentioned in episode 1, who's I think it was grandfather, developed the MDMA drug that turned into ecstasy tablets, was a key member of the panel advising President Franklin D. Roosevelt, on the aspects of biological warfare during World War II. Again, Merck, if you remember, his family, or Merck, who make all the jabs and all the other stuff, pharmaceutical company, made MDMA. In 1943, a character called Ira Baldwin, or Professor Ira Baldwin, became the first scientific director of the top secret US Army Biological Warfare Laboratories at Camp Detrick, Maryland. The man who put Gottlieb forward to Allen Dulles was Ira Baldwin of the Wisconsin Academy Foundation, University of Wisconsin, Gottlieb's old university. Baldwin had also won him an admission to the California Institute of Technology. Remember Frank Olson? He also was an employee of the United States Army Biological Warfare Lab. Olson served as a captain in the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. In 1942, he got a call from Ira Baldwin, his thesis advisor at the University of Wisconsin and the future mentor of Sidney Gottlieb, to come over and work for the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Labs at Camp Detrick. Guess where Joly West also was at? Wisconsin University. He was there for a year after completing his prerequisite coursework at the University of Iowa, with the support of the Army Specialized Training Program during World War II. The Army Specialized Training Program, ASTP, was a military training program instituted by the US Army during World War II to meet wartime demands for junior officers and soldiers with technical skills. Conducted at 227 American universities, it offered training in such fields as engineering, foreign language, and medicines. Ira Baldwin, professor of the University of Wisconsin, was a CIA agent and recruiter of at least 2, probably 3, including Joly West, and many more people for the CIA and many other things. What I'm trying to paint a picture here is that, there's no dots to connect, I'm hypothesizing here, that Philip K. Dick's father worked at the same places that all these characters worked at. Philip K. Dick has all the symptoms, whatever you want to call it, had all of an MK Ultra operative.
Maybe unknowingly, did he know?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I missed out one quick story, just quickly. When he was with his last wife, he said he got a letter, and he didn't know it was from. So he opened it and he ran to his missus saying, "Can you read this?" And this was her word. She actually said he believed it was like the playing card in the Manchurian cabinet that triggers him.
Wow.
But this manuscript, I think she said it was a review of one of his books and someone had photocopied it out. But then they'd underlined certain words, some in red and some in blue. So he believed if he read this, it would trigger something had happened. That was in his mind.
Right.
But then that is Manchurian Candidate. I mean, that's in bloody a Marvel film where Winter Soldier, certain words trigger him and then he does whatever.
Yeah.
And he believed that would happen, and that is straight. So that was a physical piece of evidence. I think he wrote a letter to the FBI and sent with information about this thing. I mean, why trust them after that? I don't know. But yeah, he wrote a letter to the FBI explaining this letter that had come that he thought was kind of toxic and it'd send him one way or the other, or maybe it'd suicide him. I don't know.
But I mean, this is a huge web, isn't it? We're talking of small individuals, all right, they're famous, and one person like Joly West. But for Joly West to be around all these people that possibly have become famous, become assassins, there's no way that one person could be around all these people unless it were a planned event. Yeah, but anyway, so that brings us to an end of episode 2 of this series, the Brave New World series, Brave New World Order series. It's getting interesting, I've got to say. And
yeah,
the next one is going to be solely about Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek of The Doors. All right, then, we'll see you next time for episode 3. Take it easy. Bye.
Take care. Bye.